Looks like we're live. Hello everyone and welcome. Ah, this is so fucking funny. Yeah. So we actually reverted back all of the changes. Yeah, we reverted back all of the changes. Sure, fucking. God, I hope this platform dies. Anyway, so hello everyone and welcome to yet another recreational programming session. Hello, welcome. So let's make a little bit of an announcement and officially start the stream. And so let's do the usual thing. Just a second. Red circle, right? Live on Twitch. And what are we doing today on Twitch.television website? What's the topic of today's stream? Today, the topic of today's stream is who needs CSS when I have a pure C, right? That's the topic of today's stream. Alright, so let me give the link to where we're doing all of that. Unfortunately, twitch.tv/Tsoding. And I'm gonna ping everyone who's interested in being pinged. And there we go, the stream has officially started. So, today we continue working on NN.H, which is a deep learning framework in pure C that we've been developing for quite some time. Holy shit. You can find this thing here. I'm gonna copy paste it in the chat, and for people who's watching on YouTube, I forgot to prepare the description file. What the hell? Right, so I'm gonna put that in the description as well. So this is the references and NN.H, right? So that's basically the source code of this entire thing. So, and what I want you to do today is actually not related to machine learning or neural networks, right? So today I want you to do some sort of like a maintenance work, but not really. So I think it's going to be rather interesting. Right, so as a part of our framework, we actually have a little bit of a UI. We could have done something like, you know, the terminal interface where all of the information is printed on a standard output in the form of a log, and that would have been enough, right? So, but I believe it is more education to have something more visual, and we are educating ourselves. We are learning how to do artificial intelligence, neural networks, and stuff like that, and primarily I learn how to do all of that, right? So I'm sort of like the main learner of this entire stuff, right? So, and I just share what I learned and stuff like that. So for me, it's quite important to have the visual things that I can like see and just like, you know, drag around and stuff like that. And because of that, I have this sort of like a UI, right? So which visualizes the current neural network. I believe this kind of visualization of the neural network is not particularly useful, right? So the deeper and more complicated neural network becomes, the more useless this visualization becomes. But I have a couple of ideas on how to improve the visualization of a fully connected neural network, right? And so this is basically the UI we have, right? Not a terminal, not a log, nor none of that stuff. You can actually drag things around, you can interact with this thing, you can just adjust the learning rate, and I think this is actually super useful. Right, I like it way more than just like looking at the numbers in the terminal and stuff like that, right? Because I can interact with this entire thing and see like the actual feedback. Right, so, but the problem here is that like developing UI applications is rather difficult. Like anyone who tried to do that will agree with me, right? Because they're very much, how some people said in our Discord chat, boilerplatey, right? So they're very much boilerplatey. And here we are using Raylib for visualization, right? So Raylib is this entire thing. And this is just a graphical library for making games. It doesn't have a UI stuff. Well, it does have a UI stuff, but it's a separate library built on top of Raylib. I don't really use it because I don't really want to depend on too many things, so because of that I just use Raylib. Right, and essentially what we have in here in terms of UI is just like things that we develop ourselves from scratch. Right, so what I came up with is a system of widgets, right? So essentially things like this plot, things like this neural network, and things like this visualization and these sort of sliders and stuff like that, they are separate widgets. They are separate widgets, and each individual widget is just a single function that is called on each individual frame of the game loop. It's kind of like a similar to immediate UI. It's basically is immediate UI. And each of this function accept a rectangle within which they have to draw themselves, right? So if we take a look at some of the stuff, so we can take a look at some of the widgets. Right, so I think they're located somewhere here. So for instance, here's the plot, the thing that renders the plot. Right, a gym plot, it accepts the plot itself, which is array of floats, array of points that you need to plot. And as you can see, it accepts a rectangle, straight of a rectangle, the left top corner and the width and height of the rectangle, and that's it. And its only goal is to like render itself, go render yourself in that specific rectangle, right? And on a higher level, when we are rendering all of that, when we're calling those functions, right, when I call gym plot, right, so let's actually find this function. So here it is. I have this sort of like a very crude layout management system where I just do all of the layouting manually. Right, so basically here I allocated the rectangle. Right, I allocated some sort of a rectangle, and then I rendered the plot within that rectangle. Then I offset the you know, the coordinate, the horizontal coordinate of that rectangle, and render the next thing, and then offset even more, and then the next thing, and so on and so forth. So essentially, as you can see, I actually manage all of these pixels and little things like literally manually, and it can become very messy very quickly. And it's like at some point you may not want to even touch this entire stuff because how messy it become. Right. So what I want you to do today, I want you to implement, you know, a reusable layout system that would do all of that stuff for us automatically. Right. Sounds interesting? Sounds interesting. So the inspiration that I got for this thing comes from the library called Qt. I don't know how many of you have heard of this library. So it's not particularly a thing these days because all of the desktop applications are developed on top of Electron, right? So all of the applications these days are web applications. But back in my days, if you wanted to write a desktop application, you would use this motherfucker, and I think it's still in use, right? So Chat Arena is written in this stuff. So look, they're trying to portray that they're still relevant or something. Maybe they are. I don't really know. Maybe they are relevant. So, but anyway. So, and essentially, this particular library actually has a very interesting system based on QLayout, right? So it's an object-oriented library, like object-oriented, whatever that means, right? So it has a class QLayout, and QLayout is basically a container into which you can just basically add widgets, and it has two different kinds of layouts. I don't quite remember. I think one of them was called Q vertical layout or something like that. It's QV box. As far as I know, it inherits the Q layout. And essentially, if you created QV box and you put a bunch of buttons into it, it will render all of that like this. So it's a vertical box. And on top of that, there is Q edge box, right? Q edge box layout, right? So it's basically a horizontal one, right? So, and if we take a look at how it behaves, right? So essentially it renders things like that, right? So the vertical is vertical and the horizontal is horizontal. So what's interesting is that you can actually nest them. Right, so one of these elements can be, for instance, Q horizontal layout. And within the horizontal layout, you can have a bunch of vertical ones. And so by nesting these different kinds of layouts that are oriented in different ways, you can create a pretty complicated UI, right? So what's interesting is that I think it has more different kinds of like sort of layout. It has a grid layout, as far as I know. There's something like grid. Yeah, so there's also grid layout, but I don't particularly know how useful it is because you can kind of simulate grid layout. So essentially you can say, okay, so I have a vertical layout and each element of the vertical layout is a horizontal layout with equal amount of elements. And there you go, you got a grid. So essentially, I suppose having this vertical and horizontal is more like atomic, more fundamental, and you build a grid layout based on that. Right, so, and essentially, I kind of want to replicate this kind of system. Right, I want to replicate this kind of system but in an immediate style, in immediate UI style. If you never heard about immediate UI, I really recommend to Google it up. It's actually kind of becomes more and more relevant these days as things like I'm GUI become more popular, right? So I think knowing what is immediate UI is kind of valuable today. Even though like developing in a web style where you have sort of like a pre-computed like a tree of elements is still sort of like a dominant way of doing UI because of web and stuff like that. Immediate UI becomes more and more popular. Maybe at some point that's how we're going to be doing UI. I don't really know, but it's kind of important for any professional to be aware of different approaches of the same thing. We're engineers after all, right? Aren't we? Are we engineers? So as an engineer, you need to know, you need to be aware of different approaches and you have to evaluate them and you have to pick the best approach for a current situation. So you cannot just like shrug away, oh, it's not relevant today. No. You have to be aware of different solutions for the same problem so you can pick the best one because you are an engineer. Are you an engineer? If you're not, you're going to be replaced by ChatGPT. Right. So you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So be aware of all of the solutions if you want to be professional. Right, so I'm going to put this in here. So here is the thing. So I'm going to put this kind of stuff. So this is I'm GUI. Right, so if you want to learn more about immediate UI, just read about this entire thing. And we're basing all of our stuff on Q layout, right? So this is basically this entire thing. And generally on Qt, I think this library is kind of like, yeah, still useful. All right. So this is basically the intro. So let me take a look at who subscribed today. Thank you so much, Felix699, for Twitch Prime subscription. It was 2 days ago, but I want to acknowledge that, right? So, because Twitch shows me that. Moldy Soul, thank you so much for tier 1 subscription. Eleonte, thank you so much for tier 2 subscription with the message Tsodin cool, very cool indeed. Thank you. And Shai, thank you so much for tier 1 subscription with the message hey, and Shai, hi. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of that. Okay, so how we're going to do all of that, how we're going to achieve that goal, right? So let's actually take a look at this entire stuff. So as already said, a widget is something that accepts the rectangle, right? Maybe we need to introduce the notion of the rectangle, right? So maybe what we're gonna have at some point in here, I'm gonna actually start writing code in the example, right? And then as the code becomes working, I'm going to be copy pasting it back into the framework, right? So this is actually kind of cool way of developing things, right? So I just write a very specific solution for very specific application, and as it develops into more and more robust thing, I just pull it out of the example into the framework so it can be reused across several applications and stuff like that, right? So first I sort of like battle test some idea in the application, and if it works out, it might become more general thing, so I pull it out. If it doesn't work out, if it dies out inside of that application, maybe it was not worth even looking into, so it just stays there or dies out and eventually gets removed, right? So I'm gonna start writing inside of the application, not in the framework, right? So we want to have something like a rectangle, right? So we want to have something like a layout rect, right? So this is a layout rect, and what do we have in here? We have the X, right, and Y, which is the left top corner of the rectangle, right? And on top of that, we want to have the width and the height of the rectangle, right? So this is basically what we want to have. Right, so, and I suppose we'll probably have to refactor our widgets to accept this specific rectangle, right? So yeah, so we can say that the widget is something that accepts a rectangle and just renders itself within that rectangle. So I'm not going to implement like anything in here, right? So this is basically an idea of a widget. Widget is just something that accepts the rectangle and renders itself within that rectangle. Right, and as already said, we're going to have different orientations of the layout. So maybe we can call it layout orient, right? And we're gonna have only two of them, right? So it's gonna be horizontal and vertical one. So it's gonna be anyway, so it's gonna be horizontal and the vertical one, right? So it's going to be horizontal and vertical one. Right. So and then I want to have sort of a thing that keeps track of the sort of like of the rectangles that were allocated, right? So essentially, what I want to be able to do, right? I want to be able to say, okay, so layout, and layout is allocated within that specific rectangle, right? So this is the rectangle for that specific layout, right? So, and then, of course, it's going to have the orientation, right? So this is the orient, right? And then I want to be able to say, okay, give me sort of like the next slot within that rectangle. So essentially, it will subdivide this thing. It will subdivide this entire thing. It would be kind of nice to actually maybe like render that somehow. It would be kind of nice to render that somehow. So maybe it should be like a different application. I don't really want to keep everything within that application. Right. So let's create maybe layout.c. Right, so I'm gonna just do something like this. Image to NN, and let me move all of that stuff in here. Right, so I kind of want to have a separate application within which I'm going to be experimenting with all of that. Right, so this is going to be the main. So basically nothing distracts us from focusing on the layout system. So we've got some subs, we've got even more subs. Thank you so much, Shinplun. I will pronounce your nickname correctly. Thank you so much for tier 1 subscription with the message, love your content. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you like what I'm doing. And God Modulator, thank you so much for tier 1 subscription as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really appreciate all of the subs. Really appreciate all of the subs. Right, so let's imagine that we have a thing of the size of the, you know, the full HD, right? So the full HD, so the width is going to be 1920, right? So something like this. It's not a widget, it's actually width, right? So and then we're going to have a height, and which is 1080, right? So it's basically 1080p, right? So it is basically 1080p. And then I can say, okay, I want to have the layout, all right? So this is going to be the root layout, and the root layout is oriented, let's say horizontally, right? So it's going to be a low horse, and the rectangle within which it is oriented, we can say that it's going to be the whole screen, right? So we can say that it's going to be the whole screen, so it's going to be width, and this is going to be height, right? So this is the layout, and essentially I want to be able to ask that layout, give me the next slot within that layout, right? Give me the next slot within that layout, similarly to how we do that in here, right? So here we have like the whole thing, and we have 3 widgets in here, right? So, but we need to kind of know, so to give you a specific size of the rectangle, we need to know how many elements we're going to have in there, right? How many elements we're going to have in there. And then we will be able to tell you the width of the element that we're giving away to you. Maybe this is something that has to be part of the layout. Maybe this is something that I have to sort of declare upfront, right? So you have to say, okay, so here is the layout, and I'm going to have the count amount of elements within that layout. You know what I mean? Right, so you kind of need to know upfront, because that will make it easier. So the reason why we have to do that is because it's immediate UI. So essentially we need to know upfront how many elements we want to render. In case of the retained UI, you first build the tree, and then based on how many elements you have within the certain layout, you'll be able to compute all of that. But we don't know that upfront. We don't have that information upfront, and because of that, we have to give it to the layout. You see what I mean? So because of that, we have to, yeah, we have to say that we're gonna have 3 elements in here. All right, so, and, all right, so then I want to be able to do something like this. Okay, so this is going to be layout slot, it is going to accept the layout, right? So this is going to be the L, and maybe we're going to ask for for the ith slot, right? Maybe we're going to ask for the ith slot, and it's going to give us the rectangle, right? Something like this. And based on the ith slot, we're gonna actually like give you the rectangle. So we may want to allocate the rectangle like this. So this is going to be the rectangle. Let's zero initialize this entire thing, and we're gonna say, okay, so it's gonna be, and here is an interesting thing. The specific slot that we're going to give to you actually depends on the orientation of the layout, right? So that's kind of important, right? Because so if you have a horizontal layout, here are the slots, right? Here are the slots, 1, 2, 3, and since we are programmers, right, it has to be 0, 1, 2, of course, right? We're not mathematicians, we start cutting from 0. So if it's horizontal, if it's vertical, it has to be like this, right? It has to be like this. So, like how exactly we compute the rectangles for the slots depends on the orientation, right? So it very much depends on the orientation. So because of that, we need to have a switch case in here, right? Some sort of a switch case, right? So let's actually do switch. And this is orientation of the layout, right? So this is the orientation. So if it is a horizontal layout, right, so how we're going to be doing all of that? How we're going to be doing all of that? So horizontal layout. So we need to know the width of a single element, right? So the width of a single element. So essentially, that width is the width of the whole thing, thing divided by the amount of elements, right? So because of that, it should be relatively straightforward to do the following thing. So let's actually maybe define something like W, and we can take the width of the whole thing, and of course it's only for the horizontal one, right? So it's only for the horizontal one, and divide by the amount of elements we're going to have in here, right? So, and that's the thing we're gonna have, right? So, and the rectangle is basically X, right? So this is the horizontal thing. It's going to be equal to I multiplied by W, right, and offset by the rectangle, right, so because it's offset by the rectangle. Y kind of stays the same all the time, right, Y kind of stays the same all the time, so we can keep it like this. The width of that thing is actually this thing, right, so it becomes this, and height is the same as the rect height. So what's interesting is that we can kind of replace this thing like directly in here, and then it will allow us to reuse our W in here. Right, that's actually kind of cool. So there we go. So this is a horizontal thing, right? So the width is basically the width of the whole thing divided by the amount of elements. Height is always the same because it's a horizontal thing, and X is just basically depends on I, right? It very much depends on I, and Y also just the same thing, right? So now we should be able to essentially mirror this entire thing, but vertically. When we mirror this entire thing vertically, right, we are dividing H instead of W, right? We're dividing H instead of W, and we're offsetting Y instead of X, like this. So yeah, so we're basically mirroring this entire thing. All right, so, and we got this thing that basically picks ith slot, right? This entire thing picks ith slot. So we allocated the root thingy, the whole root thingy, and then we should be able to do something like layout slot root and give me the 0th slot, and then we should be able to actually render the widget within that 0th slot, right? And then the first slot, and then the second slot, and so on and so forth. Right, and so on and so forth. But we don't have more than 3 slots in here, so right. So essentially this entire thing will overflow and it will require you to actually put more things in here. Maybe one of the things we want to actually put in here is some sort of an assertion, right? So we may want to assert that I is less than the count, right? So I is less than the count. So if you try to put more, it will fire an assertion and will remind you that you probably need to add more of these things, right? You kind of need to add more of these things. So let's actually try to build this entire thing and see if it compiles or not. So it's going to be clank layout.c. It doesn't compile, and this is because this is not an enumeration, it's a structure. All right, so it doesn't know about assert, and it's kind of funny how in C, when you don't include assert header, it is also causes linking error, which I never understood. Right, how the lack of declaration of assert causes you to have a linking error? Maybe because the function assert doesn't actually exist in a library, and it's actually a macro, but since this macro was never defined, the compiler thinking that it needs to find this function from from linked libraries, and it can never find them. I guess that's the reason why it says that it's implicit function declaration, but also there is no such function because it actually doesn't exist, and it's probably a macro or something like that. So you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Oh, we've got more subs. I think I didn't acknowledge Kader Wader 98. Thank you so much for Twitch Prime. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That is very, very cool. Alrighty. So let's continue. But once you include the assert, it actually works, and we have like a non-void thing in here, and we're supposed to return this rectangle in here. Alright, so here we just like declare the zero initialized rectangle, then depending on the orientation of the layout, we filled it with different things. We just like give you the ith slot, and then we return this entire thing. So one of the things I would like to do, maybe in case of the default thing, I would like to say that this stuff is unreachable. So assert unreachable. So in case we introduce a new thing in here, it will complain about that at runtime. There is a way to make it complain at compile time, but just in case I wanted to complain in a runtime as well. Right, if you know what I mean, because it's C, it never hurts to be a little bit more safe in such language as C. Am I right? Am I right, Rust developers? Rust fellow developers? What the fuck is going on outside? So, alright, so let me see. Okay, it seems to be compiling, and right, so it would be nice to actually see the consequences, the unforeseen consequences of, you know, of our application. So maybe in a widget, I'm gonna actually print the rectangles, right? You know what I mean? We can actually print the rectangles. So let's actually go ahead and do that. So this is the, let's call it the widget. All right, and we're gonna have something like this. Right, so these are the values of the rectangle. So R, H, actually it has to be X and Y, right? It has to be X and Y. And there we go. Right, so we're gonna put this stuff in here. Right, and let's actually take a look. Layout. There we go. So this is basically how it allocated the slots for the widgets. Right, as you can see, the X is growing, but Y stays the same. Right, X is small, but width is small, but the height is full. Right, if you change the orientation of this entire thing, if we say something like it's a vertical one now, it's a vertical one, now X stays the same, 0, but it's the Y that keeps modifying, right, and the width stays big and the height stays small. Right, so basically depending on the orientation, it just like orients these allocated slots differently. Right, so maybe it would be nice to actually see what the fuck is going on, if you know what I mean. Right, so let's actually turn it into a Raylib application, right? Well, let's turn it into a Raylib application. So I'm going to include the raylib.h, right? The raylib.h, and let me try to recompile this entire thing, and as you can see, it cannot find Raylib. So let me go to the build.sh, and I'm gonna just like build the layout as the rest of the application, right? So I'm gonna not build the rest of the application, so to not waste time on building them, I'm gonna only build the layout, right? So we're gonna build this entire thing. I'm gonna bring the Raylib environment in here, and there we go. So it managed to build this entire thing, but it doesn't really print anything because we haven't implemented the game loop yet. We've got some sub. Thank you so much, Koala _ thank you so much for Twitch Prime. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. So let me see. So I suppose we need to initialize the window first, right? So init window, and we can put width and height in here. That will create a huge window actually. Do I really want to do that? So maybe I want to make a smaller window, right? So you know, the usual thing I like to do is to have some sort of a factor, which is going to be like 80, and it's going to be 16 multiplied by a factor and 9 multiplied by a factor. So it's the ratio still stays 16 by 9, right? But then I can actually decide how big or small I want the whole thing to be, right? So the actual full HD is 120, right? If I remember correctly, right? If you take a look at Python 3 and you say 16 120 that and 9 that, this is full HD, right? But you can make it smaller, right? So 80 and 9, and it's kind of, you've probably seen this kind of resolutions before, right? So all of them are 16 by 9. It's just they have different factors in here, right? But the ratio, the aspect ratio is the same, right? So that's what I'm doing here. So I have a single factor that kind of controls this entire thing, and I don't care about width and height, right? So that's the usual thing I like to do. So if I remember correctly, you have to put a layout in here, title. You have to put a title in here. So init window accepts width and height and the title of the window. Right, so we've got another sub. Thank you so much, Droka87. Thank you, with a message. Ayo, Droka. Thank you so much for 19 months. Right, that's a lot of months actually. It's more than a year. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Almost 2 years, by the way, 24 months. So, and we've got 10 gifted subs from Hans__G. Thank you so much for gifting so many subs to the viewers and gifting so much money to the Jeffrey Bezos, because I don't really get any of that. I wonder if by the time this entire shit will be over and I'll be able to get the money, but by that time Twitch actually will go bankrupt and won't be physically able to give me my money. Oh, that would have been actually, I kind of low-key want that to happen, because that would have been the funniest shit ever actually, if you think about it. It's just like as the God's joke, as the universe joke, that would have been fucking hilarious. I kind of want that to happen. Right, that would have been so fucking fun. Anyway, right, because it's kind of going really on downfall, right? As some people say in the Twitch chat, right? So I actually not sure if by the time I'll be able to get this money, the Twitch will be physically able to give me this money, right? I'm actually not sure. So yeah, but anyway, it doesn't matter. There are things that are more important than money in our life, and that is immediate mode layout management system. That is way more important than money. Right, so let me see. So the other thing that we usually do in here, apart from initializing the window, right, we need to set the frame rate, right? So we need to set the frame rate. Set target FPS 60, right? So we're gonna put this thing in here. So this is gonna be 60. So we are rendering this shit at 60 FPS. We're rendering this shit at 60 FPS. And all right, so the next thing we have to do, we have to organize the event loop. Of course, we're gonna be initializing the layout before the event loop, right? So in here, should window, maybe window should close. I don't quite remember. Yeah, window should close. It checks whether the window should close, and within this thing we're rendering the widgets. And as far as I know, you can also say close window or something. So that's basically it. But you also have to do begin drawing. So you start drawing. Here we are drawing the widgets, and then we're ending the drawing, right? So we're ending the drawing. So do we need to do anything else? I think we also can clear the background, right? So I'm gonna clear it with black, right? So let's actually clear it with black, and that's basically everything. So I wonder if it's going to work. It kind of worked. And I think to maintain the event loop, I have to put not in here. Should not close. And there you go. This is what we have. And as you can see, widget prints this entire shit. Right, so instead of printing, what we want to do, actually, we want to render that rectangle, right? So we want to do draw rectangle, right? Draw rectangle, Rx, Ry, RW, RH, and the color we have to pick. Maybe we could pass the color in here. Let's actually pass the color in here. I think that would make way more sense. Right, and in here we can say red, green, right? Red, green, blue. There we go. And there we go. Right. So this is right. So this is a vertical layout. This is a vertical layout. Right. And if I change the orientation of the layout, right, so it becomes a horizontal one. And you can literally see what I was talking about. Right. You can literally see all of that. Isn't that cool? Right. So I think that's pretty freaking cool. You can literally see all of that choice. So, okay. We've got that. But the thing is that to change the order, of these things, you have to really like, you cannot change the order like by changing the lines, right? Because if I put green last, it's still going to be in the middle because of the index. So you also have to change the index like that, which basically means you have to like, yeah, managing the order of this entire thing is really, really finicky. And I don't really like it like that. So what I'm thinking is that maybe what we have to do, we have to keep track of that index inside of the layout. Right, so we don't really want to manage the indices in here. So the whole point of this layout system is to not manage fucking anything. Right, we don't want to manage anything. Right, so let's actually make the layout keep track of those goddamn indices. Right, so essentially what I want to do is I want to say, okay, I now is part of the layout, right? And it's initially going to be 0. So, and here is going to be just I, and here this is the I, and here this is the I, and then I'm going to increment the I, right? So essentially by calling the layout slot, you increment its internal I. You increment its internal I, and then it always gives you the next slot. It always gives you the next slot. You know what I mean? Right, so and essentially here, if we try to recompile this entire thing, right, we don't have to provide this entire stuff, right? So we always say layout slot, and then next layout slot, and next layout slot, and so on and so forth. And something went wrong, and this is because we do not reset the index on the next iteration, right? Because essentially it will keep incrementing that I on the next iteration. So one of the things we can do in here, I suppose we can just move this entire thing inside of the loop, right? Because it's such a lightweight object, recreating such lightweight object on each iteration that costs nothing, right? And that will effectively reset I anyway. Right, that makes sense actually in here, right? So there we go. So that seems to be working. And what's cool now, the order of the widgets is determined by the order of these things. I can say, okay, I want red to be last now. I just moved it to the last one, right? And now it's the last one. That's kind of cool, isn't it? I think that's pretty cool, right? I think that's pretty cool. Alright, so you can now change the order in here, and then here you can do actually a vertical one, and that seems to be working. It seems to be working. So, alright, that sounds interesting. So one of the things I want to be able to do, actually, we want to have a nested Scheiße, right? We want to have a nested Scheiße, because if we take a look at the original thing that we have in here, we have a lot of nested stuff, right? So here, obviously, this is a horizontal layout, right? So with 3 elements, and then the third element is actually split into like 3 elements in here, and then within this thing we have even more split elements. So as you can see, we want to have like a complicated nested stuff, right? Complicated nested stuff. Use I didn't really speak German, I really apologize. I just like the word Scheiße. I think it's the most beautiful word in any language I've ever heard. So yeah, thank you Germans for inventing such a beautiful, beautiful word. I unironically love this word. I don't know why. Out of all of the words, I love the word Scheiße. All right. The most beautiful swear word, yeah. That's true. It's the most beautiful swear word. All right. So, and how can we do all of that? All right, how can we do all of that? Interestingly, right, we can do some cool shit. Okay, so we have a layout root, right? We have a layout root, and we can say, okay, we can have the sort of like a third layout, right? The third layout is going to be, it's going to have the orientation of vertical one, right? And its rectangle. Freaking neighbors are drilling shit in the... It's a fucking midnight, almost a midnight. And my neighbors are about to drill some shit. What the fuck is wrong with these people? I have no... Anyway. So... Neighbors drilling scheiße, yeah, exactly. Oh, it's a Friday night. Yeah, it's a Friday night. Okay, I forgot. Recreational drilling. Recreational drilling. So, anyways, so and rectangle. What's gonna be the rectangle? Can we literally say, okay, use the layout slot of the root? So we take out the slot of the root and we set it as the rectangle of another sub-layout. And because of that, the sub-layout sort of naturally work out by themselves. You know what I mean? Right, so here we can say we're gonna have 3 of these things in here. So, so a third, let's actually call it panel, right? So this is the panel, all right. And in here, I wanna say, okay, so this is the panel, this is a green, and here we can have yellow and magenta, right? So, and we are actually rendering widgets for the panel sub-layout, right? For the panel sub-layout. This is not what the point, actually, we need a different thing. There's no magenta. Is there purple? Purple. I don't know what kind of colors do we have in Raylib. It works out. Look at that. That actually worked out. What the fuck? So yeah, that's basically the layout system I wanted to implement. Right. So there's a question, how can I access the Discord channels I subbed just a few minutes ago? You have to connect your Discord and Twitch account together, right? I think in the Discord settings, there is a way to connect your Twitch account. If you're still not sure how to do that, just Google it up. There are tutorials how to do that. And as soon as you connect your Twitch account to your Discord account, it will automatically grant you the permission to talk on the Discord server. So that's how basically it works, right? Oh, right. So I want to be able to actually resize this entire thing. You know what I mean? I want to be able to resize this entire thing. So I think I need to set this entire stuff resizable. Let me see. So flag window resizable, and I think it's not going to even work. Yeah. Okay. As you can see, this shit doesn't update. Well, look how the yellow stripe is twerking. Yeah, it is. Okay. So I suppose we actually have to set not the original width and height in the root layout, but rather the actual width and height of the window, right? The actual width and height of the window. So how do we get the width and height? I remember it was something like get render width and get render height or something like that. I think it was something like this. There we go, and we can just do like this. Maybe I can probably, can I put that stuff in here? I think you should be able to put this stuff in here. I think it will work out. Yeah, it will work out. Like, after programming in Jai for a little bit, I'm still under the impression that you can't put non-constant expressions in here, because Jai right now it is right now, by the way. In future, it's probably not going to be like that, but right now, in its current state, it doesn't allow you to have a runtime expressions in compile time expressions like this in here. Right, and you have to always work around that by actually saving that to a variable. Right, and this is not because it's how it was designed, this is because this is how it is implemented right now, so it's in a transitional state, so it's easier to make it like that. Right, and because of that I developed this like sort of like habit, thinking that, oh, I need to pull all of these like non-constant things in a separate variable or something, but here this is a C. I'm still looking forward when I will finally be able to just put whatever in these places in Jai, right? But it's not implemented yet. I'm sure that they don't allow that yet. Well, maybe because it's not a high priority, right? So this kind of stuff is probably not really super important compared to other problems John is trying to solve in the language, right? So because John, as far as I know, trying to solve like very complicated fundamental problem with the language, and being able to just like put this kind of stuff in, you know, const literals, it's not that fundamental, and you can always work around that. It's not a showstopper, right? Just because you can't do that, it doesn't make the language unusable, right? It's just like, it's minor inconvenience that will eventually be fixed, right? So this is sort of like the you know, the general approach within the language, right? So this kind of thing, they usually has like less priority. And again, the language isn't finished, right? So we're not allowed to criticize it. So anyway, right, so this entire thing works, and that's pretty cool. But I don't really like how inconvenient that shit is. I don't really like the fact that I have to come up with the name for these panels and stuff like that. Like, how do you call the third panel in here? Does it even have the name? Should it have the name? Like, I don't really like that. Like, I have to like create a separate freaking variable just to be able to like subdivide a layout. This is not like a convenient scheisse. Yeah, chat already says inconvenient scheisse. So we need to do something about that, right? So what we can do, we can maybe turn that into a stack, some sort of a stack. But turning that into a stack will require you to maybe allocate dynamic memory, and doing dynamic memory in here is not particularly like a pleasant thing. All right, you know, I've got an idea. I'm gonna do a small break. I'm gonna make a cup of tea. While I'm making a cup of tea, I'm also gonna think like how we're gonna resolve this entire problem, and I'm gonna come back with a cup of tea and I'm gonna solve that scheisse together. How about that? All right, let's make some break. All right, so let's try and introduce the stack. How about that? So before we introduce the stack, I kind of want to replicate the look of the UI as it was in the original application, so to speak, right, in this one, because in this one there is a little bit of a padding between like a top, like on top and at the bottom, right? So there is a little bit of a padding, and I put these elements within that padding, right? So I kind of want to replicate that. So what if we had something like size t padding, and it's going to be 100 of these things. And it's going to be top and bottom, so that means in terms of y, it's going to be equal to padding, and in terms of height, it's going to be minus padding, but it's twice of the padding, right? So it's twice of the padding. And let me rebuild the entire thing. Hey, Emacs, come on, you can do that. All right, so this is what I was talking about, right? As you can see, there is this padding, but it's... I don't like this UI, by the way. Can you see anything? Can you click anything or anything like that? I kind of don't like this pixel stuff. It's probably because of how we round things. All right. So what if we don't floor them? Because here we're basically flooring them. We're truncating them, and in case of the positive values, it's basically flooring them. We can try to do the following thing. We can try to seal them instead. Silf. Right, so let's actually do silf. And I wonder if it's going to make this stuff a little bit better. So yeah, so the kind of they kind of overlap a little bit now, I think. But you can't see that anyway, because it's just like 1 pixel overlap. But yeah, we're basically taking a seal of it instead of a floor, and they are just like, you know, yeah, they're flash with each other. Is that how you say that in English? I don't speak English, I'm sorry. I'm trying. I'm trying to speak English for the last 10 years, and I still suck at it, because I never been in an actual English-speaking environment, right? So, yeah. All of the practice I had is from the internet. Cheers, by the way. All right. So yeah, so the problem with this padding is that it's like always the same regardless of the size of the window, which results in this kind of situation, which is kind of fun. So one of the things we can do, we can actually make the padding a function of the height, so to speak. Well, I mean, it depends. You know what I mean. So we can take height, and we take a fraction of the height. Maybe it's going to be 1/100th of the height. Does it look good? Does it look... Okay, so it's... right, so what we have to do, we have to take... Ooh! So yeah, I need the height of the window, which means that I kind of want to factor out the height into a separate variable in here. Alright, and since I already factored it out, maybe I can do that with width as well. Right, so let's actually do that with width as well. And in here, maybe this has to be float, and still I'm already starting to use floats. Maybe this stuff also gonna be float, right? So floats infected everything. Floats infected everything, so that's basically what happened. All right, so it's, yeah, so this stuff kind of worked, but I suppose this thing has to be a little bit bigger. There we go. Now, this padding is a fraction of the height, right? So it becomes bigger or smaller depending on the height of this entire thing. Isn't that cool? I think that's pretty cool. So this is adaptive UI without CSS and JavaScript. Holy fucking shit. Can your shitty web do that? I don't fucking think so, mate. Nobody fucking needs your web. Web is dead. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with it, but anyway. So let me see. That looks okay. Maybe I would say something like 15. Yeah, 15. That's actually, that looks a goodie. That looks a goodie. All right. So let's introduce the stack finally. Right. So let's introduce the stack. People from web absolutely love the word stack. I'm not even sure that they know what that word originally meant. Right, so actually this is an interesting question. Do web developers know about such data structure as stack? Right, do they know this is a data structure where you can put elements on top and you can only pull off the elements, like pop elements off of the stack, or they only heard that word in the context of the technology and the latest stickers for their MacBooks? Or actually, nobody actually checked that. I think somebody should actually go ahead and try to check whether the web developers actually heard of the stack data structure. Because I feel like they never heard about such word outside of the context of the stickers on the MacBooks. So, yeah. Anyways. So I think we got some subs. Thank you so much, Moldy Soul, for gifting a 1-tier sub to the community. Thank you. As a web dev, I can confirm we're on a stack of those garbage LinkedIn posts. I feel you. Yeah, I feel you. To be fair, how often do you need like a stack data structure? How often do you need it? It's just like, even if you need it, you usually need it in the cases where you can just do recursive thing. So not very often you go and just like, aha, I need the stack data structure that we learned in university in CLRS course. No, you never go like that. It's just like usually, oh, it's some sort of like recursive algorithm or something. It's just like whatever usually. So it's quite rare, like in actual like production programming. You really need stack regardless of your area of expertise, whether it's web or something else. Right. So yeah. Anyways. Anyways. So let's implement the stack. What I'm going to do, let's create like literally data structure, right? So it's going to be layout stack, and I'm not really sure how to exactly to organize the stack, but let's assume that the whole stack is going to be a dynamic array. Right. So, and how do I design dynamic arrays? Yeah, right. So my dynamic arrays usually have 3 fields. The first field is items, which points at the beginning of the items in dynamic memory. So this is going to be basically the array of layouts. Right. So we used to have just a single layout. Now we have an array of them. Right, now we have an array of these layouts. On top of that, we have the count, how many items we have in the stack, and then we also have the capacity, how many elements we allocated, right? So because we're working with dynamic memory, which is kind of not something that I want to do in an event loop, right? Right, so it kind of reminds me, because we're going to be doing like a malloc. We're effectively going to be calling malloc in a loop. Do you guys remember that loop, that meme of a man on the drums, and it's just like when I forgot to free in the loop. You know what I mean, right? That meme. So this is basically we're creating this situation, effectively. So it's gonna be fun. We'll see how it goes. All right. So I need to bring the macro that allows me to push into the dynamic arrays. So di append, it should be available in nn.h. di append, that macro, right? So it's a very simple macro that allows me to push into dynamic arrays. I'm gonna just bring it in here, and that effectively will allow me to push into dynamic arrays. So what I'm thinking is that maybe what we're gonna have layout stack, and you're gonna basically push into the layout stack. And what we're gonna be pushing into the layout stack. So first of all, we're gonna accept the pointer into the layout stack into which we're pushing things. And I suppose we're gonna be accepting the whole layout. Do we wanna accept the whole layout, or do we wanna actually accept the parameters? So where is the layout? Layout. Here it is. So suppose one of the things we want to be able to accept is the orientation, rectangle, and account, right? These 3 things are super important: orientation, rectangle, and account. All right. So this is the 3 things that are super important for us. So we're going to be accepting layout rectangle, right? The layout orientation, right? Layout orientation, orient. And the count, how many elements we want to have in here, right? So this is the count. And effectively what we're going to be doing in here, I suppose, is just constructing the layout out of these things, right? So the orientation is orientation, rectangle is rectangle, and count is count. Maybe I should create a constructor for the layout, you know what I mean? Right, because it will make it actually a little bit easier to add more parameters that require initialization for the layout. Right, essentially if I do something like new layout, or maybe make layout, and I'm gonna accept all of these things in here, layout rectangle, rect, then layout orient. Right. So how is it going to help us to make the code more maintainable in case if we add a new field? Right, let's imagine that we're going to add another field in here, I don't know, color, right? And that thing will require initialization. So the only thing we'll have to do is basically add the color in here, and that will break all of the calls to this function, forcing you going through them and providing the color. So, and we have to do that because C is kind of a meh language, right? I think maybe in a better language you wouldn't have to do that, right? So, but to make the C compiler to warn you that you forgot to initialize one of the fields, right, this is one of the things we can do, right? And it kind of makes sense, Does it make sense? I think it makes sense, right? Because if you add a new field, and you may quite easily forget to initialize that field, right? So then you have to search for all of the places where you need to initialize all of that, and that might not be obvious. And this is specifically for C programming language, right? So this is a specifically C issue, right? So in other programming languages, you may not want to do this kind of stuff, right? It just like depends very much. It is what it is, and it isn't what it isn't. Is it not? I think it is. The Misa knows where it is because it knows where it isn't. Alright, so we need to initialize the count, and I we can keep it just 0 initialized, right? So we can just keep the I 0 initialized because nobody gives a shit. Alright, so and in here, what we can do, we can effectively just, yeah, we can just like make layout out of these things, orient rect, because if I add a new field in here, it will break in here, which means that I will be able to quite easily break it in here by adding additional parameter if it's going to be a core, and so on and so forth. So it basically maintains the chain, right? It basically maintains the chain. And then I can do da append, and I'm going to provide ls, and I'm going to just put l in here. Right, might as well just inline this entire thing, but I feel like this is a little bit more readable, right? Because this is the thing, right? No matter if what you do, whether you split this into 2 lines or you put that into a single line, you still should interpret it as 2 actions. In case of this single expression, you have to read the actions inside out. First of all, with this kind of style, you don't even know where the actions begin. So they begin roughly inside of the expression, and then you have to read the expression outwards to understand the sequence of instructions, of actions. If you do it like that, you just have to read like top to bottom, which makes it kind of easier to read, I think, but personally for me, right? So for other people, it might be maybe different, right? So, and of course, for this kind of example, it's a very simple expression, but imagine more complicated expression. So, and this is one of the problems for me, when I see like a Lisp style of programming, right, where everything is a single huge expression, because you can't really make out where the actual actions begin, because you have to read the expression inside out, and you don't even know from which point inside out you have to start reading. You know what I mean? Right. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who has these kind of problems, but when I read this like a purely functional expression-based stuff, it's really difficult for me because you have to read them inside out, and it's not clear from like where exactly does it even start inside out. You know what I mean? Right. And if you just unfold it into imperative thing, you just have to read it top to bottom, and that's it. You don't even have to think like how you have to read it. It's just like a very straightforward direction of reading. So maybe it's something wrong with my brain, but I've been doing pure functional programming for basically 10 years. I know a thing or two about functional programming. I created one of the probably most popular functional programming tutorials on YouTube. Just think about that. And also, my purely functional programming algorithm was cited in a scientific paper about making pure functional programming faster. So, here's my credentials. I know a thing or two about pure functional programming, expression-based programming. So, and this kind of stuff comes from me, right? After all of these years and all of this stuff that I've done, I kind of think imperative programming is easier to read. Hate me as much as you want, but that's just my opinion after so many years of doing this kind of shit. Sorry. Again, I might be wrong, but I've created a lot of cool tutorials about Haskell and functional programming, and also my work being cited in a scientific paper. I don't know, maybe I know a thing or two, maybe not. Well, maybe all of that is bullshit. Anyways. So, let's continue. So, we pushed some stuff. Right. And I kind of want to create the version of the layout slot, but for layout stack. So, which basically proxies it to the layout on the top. So yeah, essentially, let's actually do something like this: layout rect, layout stack slot, and we of course going to be taking layout stack ls. And let me take a look at the layout slot. Yeah, there we go. So, and in here, basically we have to take the top element. The top element is basically items, ls count -1, and we can just say layout slot. And we have to pass it by a pointer, and we just return that. So, but this is a very dangerous thing. What if this entire thing is empty? So one of the things we probably have to do, we have to assert that the count is greater than 0. There we go. So essentially this thing allows us to push new layouts, right, new layouts, and then, right, and then just basically draw the slots out of this entire thing. Yeah, basically draw the slots out of this entire thing. But one of the things I want to be able to do, I want to be able to say, okay, take a slot out of the inner layout, right? Take a slot out of the inner layout and push it into as the next layout. So this is one of the things I can do. So I should be able to already do that. I think I should be able to already do that. So let's actually give it a try. So essentially, instead of layout root, we may have layout stack. I have the following idea. So let's say layout stack, this is ls, and we're going to initialize it with 0. So the first thing we're going to be doing in here, right, the first thing we're going to be doing in here, we're going to be pushing layout stack push, right? So let me actually copy paste this entire thing. So we're going to be pushing, right, so we give this thing, and we have a horizontal one, so it's going to be low horse. And the rectangle that we need to put in here is this rectangle. Maybe we need to create a constructor for the rectangle. But the rectangles fields do not change very often. Make layout rect. We can try to do something like that. I mean, why not? Let's just quickly create that. Sure. Let's just quickly create that. Layout rect. Make layout rect. Float x, float y, float w, float h, and let's just do this kind of stuff. So this is going to be 0 or x, y, w, h, and return r. Right, so we just created this entire thing. So we can actually put it in here, right, and then we can say everything is rendered within this block, at the end of which we probably want to pop an element out of that stack, right? So we basically pushed a layout onto the stack, we rendered some stuff in here, and we want to pop the element out of that. I think we didn't create the pop. Right, so let's actually quickly create that. So we're going to accept the layout stack ls, and in here you cannot pop a thing if it's empty. So one of the things we probably have to check is if count is greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, right, so we're just gonna decrement it by 1, and there we go, we basically popped the thing out of it. Right, there we go. So, and the reason why I put layout outside of the loop is that I expect that once we reach the end of the iteration, it's gonna be empty. Right, so effectively you push the thing. For every push into the layout stack, I expect to have a corresponding pop. That's what I expect, right? So for every push I expect the corresponding pop. So that means the layout stack is not going to allocate more memory than needed. So it's not going to start leaking memory like fucking crazy all over the place. There is another interesting thing we can put in here. We can basically assert that at the end of this iteration, the layout stack, the count for the layout stack is going to be 0. So, and if it's not, that means we forgot a pop somewhere, and that could leak. You know what I mean, right? So that's very important. So because of that, at the end of the iteration, I want to kind of assert that we don't have some extra layout things, because in the next iteration we're going to push more and more and more, and we ran out of memory, right? So freaking this. Okay, so and when I'm doing like a widget, right? So what I'm doing is I'm doing layout stack slot on ls. Layout stack slot on ls, right? And then I need to push another sub thing, right? So that means I need to do another layout stack push, but then instead of make layout rect, I just have to use this kind of thing, right? So you see, I'm taking the slot out of this thing, and I'm using it as the rectangle for the next layout. But this one has to like use the vert from here, right? And then the count is going to be 3. It's already 3 in here, so we can just like remove this entire thing. Right, and we need to have a corresponding pop for this thing, right? And similarly here, I have to use ls. Let's put it like this. Stack slot. That looks cool, isn't it? Right, now I don't have to manage like several layout variables, come up for the names for them or anything. I just have a single layout stack. I just push something on the layout stack and pop out of it, and that's it. That's the whole thing. Right. This is actually kind of cool. Wait a second, is it going to work, I wonder? Right, so there's some stuff in here. Sylph, implicit declaration. So let's actually include some math. I wonder why I didn't complain about implicit declaration of Sylph before. That's kind of weird. Okay, diappend doesn't have a realloc. This is probably because we have to do std_lib. Right, that's probably what it wants. Do we have anything else? Make layout rect. Maybe that's what I wanted actually in here. What else do we want? Oh yeah, for the pops we have to provide the ls, of course. Anything else? It's a dot. It works. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That works. So, and what that means, by the way, that means we can subdivide that shit even further. Right, who said I can't just, okay, take green, right, and subdivide this thing even further? Right, so this one is gonna have 2, but it's going to be horizontal again, so it's gonna be horse. And here we're gonna have like purple or whatnot, so there's gonna be 2 of them. There we go. So now we subdivide it even further, and we can make it more and more and more complicated. Like we can keep subdividing this shit. We can just keep subdividing it. So, isn't it cool? I think it's pretty cool. For the yellow one, so here we did a horizontal one. Right, we can subdivide it even further, but this time it's going to be 3. Right, so it's going to be yellow, white, green, something like that. Right. So there we go. So this is kind of like the stuff that we can have in here, and those are going to be widgets that you can interact with. Right. So those could be widgets that you can interact with. We can even make them kind of interactable, if you know what I mean. Right, so essentially, when we are rendering the widget, we can quite easily check whether the mouse position is within the rectangle, and we can highlight this widget so you can clearly see that you can interact with this kind of stuff. Right, so let me open the arraylib thingy. So this is going to be arraylib include arraylib get mouse position. Yeah, there we go. So there is a get mouse position. Right. So get mouse position. You know what would be cool? So we have this position, which is vector2 position. It would be kind of cool if we had a function that takes the position and checks whether it's within the rectangle. And as far as I know, arraylib had a structure, had its own rectangle, which is kind of similar to our rectangle, right? Our definition of the rectangle is this thing, right? So we created our own rectangle, and here is the arraylib's rectangle. Is there any way to check that we are inside the rectangle? Let's actually see rectangle. Is there any... So there is a math rectangle. Okay, so there's nothing related to rectangle in here. Maybe there is something in here. So rectangle, for components rectangle. So font, we don't care about the fonts. Set shape for the texture. Draw rectangle, I don't care about drawing rectangle. I only care about checking within the rectangle. Check collisions. Wait. Check collision point rect. Check if point isn't... This is precisely what we need. Right, if we actually used the raylib rectangle, right, if we actually used the raylib rectangle, we could have done something like R, like this. If check collision, if it's inside of this thing, we could have replaced color with something else. We could have replaced the color with something else. Can we make the color brighter or something like that? Is there something that can modify the color? Right, so let me find functions that return the color. There's no such thing. Oh, this is because they start with some prefix, right? Yeah, RL. Okay, RL API color. Okay, so this is loading the image. I don't care about that. Fade. Okay, fade. Is there something else? Tint. We can change the tint. We can change. Okay, so this is actually get color with brightness correction. So this is something that we probably need in here. Right. So, and essentially what we could have done is just took the color and maybe made it brighter, twice as much brighter or something like that. Right. If we just used the rectangles from raylib. One of the things we can do, we can just convert them, right? We can say something like rectangle RR or I'm sorry. I'm really okay. So it's 1.5 of an hour. So and I had my second cup of tea, so I'm just going crazy already. Right. So we could have done something like this. And do we have a draw rectangle that accepts the rectangle of the raylib? I'm pretty sure there should be something like that. There should be something like that, bro. Yeah, okay, so it's literally called get draw rectangle rec. So we can do something like this. So this is or. So yeah, and the question is, do I want to switch completely to the raylib rectangle? So I don't really want to depend too much on raylib, to be fair, right? I want a raylib to be one of the graphical backends that our library can use, but if you don't want to use raylib, you would be able to use something else, right? So we're going to define like a minimum API that the backend must implement, like an ability to draw rectangles, an ability to draw lines and stuff like that. Right, and just for raylib, we're going to forward the corresponding things, and if you want to forward it to something else, you're free to do that, right? So that will allow you to, for example, render in a terminal if you want to. Right, so because of that, I'm kind of hesitant on actually just like removing layout rect. So, but we'll see. So, and yeah, one of the maybe targets, rendering targets, as the chat says, could be Olive C, right? It just like depends. I don't want to sort of like vendor lock you on the raylib, right? So, even though I have to admit that kind of like a raylib has this tendency to try replace literally everything. So you kind of like find yourself being locked on raylib, whether you want it or not. And it's kind of gives me like a similar vibes to Qt. Qt library kind of does the similar thing, right? You know what I mean? It's just like it grows and expands indefinitely and it tries to replace everything, right? So if you never programmed in Qt, you probably don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But if you have experience with Qt, you know precisely what I'm talking about. As soon as you start using Qt, it's kind of similar to Apple products, to be fair. It's just like a closed garden, right? As soon as you start using one thing, oh, it's very convenient to use it with this another thing, and with that thing, you just find yourself being just like sucked into this like a quicksand. And it kind of really was cool, don't get me wrong, it's fucking cool, but it gives off that slight vibe similar to Apple products and Qt and stuff like that. It's just kind of, see what you're doing in here, I see what you're doing, I've been developing for too long. Anyway, so anyways, Rayleigh was awesome, don't get me wrong, it's a very cool library, I really recommend it. But just saying. Anyways, so what do we have in here? Yeah, this is what I wanted to do. I just wanted to basically react on the on hover over, and yeah, you can end, but it just makes them white, and this is not what I want. It's one of these situations when it has to be less than 1. It's probably one of those situations. Oh yeah, so it has to be less than 1. Okay. Yeah, so as you can see, you can interact with that. Yeah. We have a simple UI. Yay! Isn't that cool? I think that's pretty cool. Right? That's pretty awesome. So, by the way, so there is a reason why I was using like different colors. Now, since we have a highlight, I can actually use the same colors. Right. Right, so you won't tell that this yellow stripe is actually 3 elements until you try to interact with them. Now we can clearly see that the 3, well, kind of. So I think we have to make it even more bright, right? Maybe 75. Maybe 75. Yeah, there we go. So now you can see that it's the 3 elements, right? And you can clearly see that this is 1, 1, and this is 3, because there is some sort of like a feedback. Without that feedback, you would be never able to tell that it's a 3 separate things. So that's kind of important. That's the importance of the feedback for the user. So another thing that would actually signify that these are separate elements, if we had some sort of a padding between them, you know what I mean? So maybe we should add a little bit of a padding between them. And you know what's cool is that we're getting all of that complications for free. So the only thing we have to define in here is just like the structure of the layout, how nested they are. We just push a new thing, we just pop the thing, and so on and so forth. And we can just hide all of the complexity of figuring out the paddings and margins and stuff like that inside of functions like layout, stack, load, and so on and so forth. Right. So that's basically my goal. Right, just to tuck all of that complexity of like trying to do the pixel perfect, like very sophisticated thing inside, and it just like define the layout, and it just does everything for you automatically. So that's basically my goal, and I think we're approaching it. We're slowly approaching that thing. So yeah, is this the beginning of the process? No, I don't really want to overcomplicate this entire thing. This is supposed to be just like a quick little thing for the deep learning framework. Right, so we have a deep learning framework where you have UI components which lets you inspect the model that you're training. And essentially what I want to be able to do, I want to be able to have a simple thing where you just take pre-made components for different situations and just slap them on the screen in a particular fashion. That's basically what I want. I don't want anything more complicated than that. Right, and because depending on the model, you want to actually visualize slightly different things, we don't try to make a super complicated application that is just basically contains everything. No, we just give you small pre-made components, and it's up to you to combine them in whatever fashion you want, right, within the language and stuff like that. So I don't think it has to be a browser, right, it has to be something super simple to just throw things together, if you know what I mean. Right. Does it make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. This is Electron. Can your Electron resize so freaking easily without lagging or anything like that? Well, it is lagging a little bit, but this is because it's a 10 years old laptop. And also, I'm streaming on that laptop. If you take any Chromium, like any Chromium application, and you try to resize it, look at the delay of resizing. Like, you just resize, it needs some time to recompute, and only then it updates its layout. This entire thing, it's just like, it resizes on the fly. It just resizes on the fly. And when I'm not streaming, it's even faster. So don't tell me this is Electron. This is not Electron. Yeah, it's a network latency. Yeah. I forgot. It's a network latency. I'm sorry. Electron lagging on your M1 MacBook Pro? Holy shit. People are so got used to software being shit that they don't even notice that. So I think I'm gonna push that to the repo. Yeah, just a second, chat. Just a second. I'm gonna like literally push this thing right now to the repo. Like this. So this is like basically one file, one single file that we implemented, and one line added to the shell script. That's it. That's the whole framework. Right, we need to organize a conference to actually announce that we made a new framework to the world. Right, so literally one file. So I'm gonna commit it right now. And who has the Raylib on their machine? Build it on your machine, run this thing, and try to resize it. And tell me that is not smooth. Just tell me that is not smooth. It can be fucking smooth like butter. Holy shit, that's the best butter you will ever experience in your... I'm sorry. Anyway, so add the layout prototype, right? So, and yeah. So, and you can find the source code of this entire thing here in the chat. Butter UI, yeah, this is actually kind of cool name for a UI library, Butter UI, because it's gonna be butter smooth. Yo, finally. So, Yusu. Building right now, yeah. So it is not particularly smooth on my machine right now, but this is the reasons. There are reasons because I'm also streaming. Super smooth. So chat confirms super smooth here. Exactly. Exactly. Can you achieve the same shit with Electron? No, you cannot. Don't even dare to compare that to Electron. Please. No. All right. So, yes. What I was doing, I want you to add the padding. Right. I want you to add a padding. So let's go ahead and do that. So I suppose one of the things we can do is basically say that padding is going to be part of the layout, right? That's one of the things we can do in here, right? And how we're going to be using a padding, right? How we're going to be using the padding. So my idea is we can effectively just allocate a slot, right? So here is the layout. So basically the rectangle within which we're allocating everything. Then we say, please allocate the slot. Right, so we allocate the slot like this. So we allocated the slot. And then we can try to maybe reduce the size of that slot like so, according to the padding. According to the padding or something like that. Or maybe half of a padding. So when you allocate the second thing, it is going, the actual distance between the thing is going to be like the full padding or something like that. We can try to do something like this. So first you allocate this thing, and then you just like shrink it according to the padding, if you know what I mean. Right. That's what we can try to do. And maybe that will automatically give us the padding between the elements. It's actually a cool idea, I think. I think that's a cool idea. Okay, good. So, right, so this is basically what we created, right? So this is basically what we created, and after that, I can say, okay, our x, so we have to bring x to the right and y to the right. So it's going to be plus padding, half of a padding, and this one is going to be also half of a padding. But in terms of w, we actually subtract full padding, right? We subtract full padding, and in terms of height, we subtract full padding. And we have to do the same on the second branch, which kind of hints us that we have to do that maybe somewhere here, right? So here, first of all, we are allocating the slot, right? We're allocating the slot, and then we're shrinking that slot according to the padding we want to have in there, right? So right now it's not going to change anything, right? Because it's set to 0, right? So it is set to 0. We need to update make layout and maybe accept this padding as a parameter in here. And this is precisely why I created this function, because now all of the places where we call this function are going to break, which will initiate the compiler assisted refactoring, right? So let's actually take a look at that. Well, there we go. So it's broken in here. So that means we have to put padding in here, but where we can get it from here. And that breaks even more places. So we go to these places and we're forced to actually do this stuff. Okay, so we already have a padding, and this padding is not the same as the padding that we just defined. It's sort of like a frame. Let's literally call it frame then. Right, why not? Right, so let me query replace padding frame. Right, and so here we have to provide the padding. Let's literally provide the padding. And the padding is going to be, let's say, 10 pixels. Maybe it also should depend on width or height, but we'll see, So let's go through the rest of this stuff. So this is the padding. This is the padding. I also can't see shit, don't worry about it. So you can't see some of the code. I also can't see it, right? I literally just like type it like blindly. Right, I just pressed Alt to complete, and I kind of hope that it was padding, but I also can't see anything. So if you want to see how it looks like for me, it looks like this for me, right? I also can't see shit, but I just like blindly type thing. You know why? Because the compiler will tell me anyway if I made a typo somewhere there, so it doesn't matter. Oh, there we go. Looks like shit, but it works. So, okay, I see what's going on here. So as you can see, there's more padding between these things than between this. So this is one padding, and here you have twice as much of padding here. This is because like the more you nest, the more it kind of god damn it, you can't, god damn it. God fucking damn it, mate. God fucking damn it. It's kind of like a Windows start menu now, yeah. So how can we... I guess... I feel like the thing that contributes to that, if... For example, this thing didn't have the right padding. If it didn't have the right padding, it wouldn't contribute to that. Okay, so I have a different idea on how to approach this entire stuff, because I still want to kind of do that, right? So I just want to have the uniform padding between all of the elements regardless of their nestedness. You know what I mean? Right, so... It's kind of difficult to explain, but I want all of this padding to be universal, right? So literally the same thickness. I think it's gonna make it very satisfying, but I'm thinking how to do that. So we'll see. So here's an idea. What if we're not gonna do the padding at the very beginning of the things, right? So essentially, we say, okay, let me allocate 3 elements. So this is going to be the first element, and as you can see, no padding in here, right? And no padding at the top and no padding at the bottom. Padding is only going to be between the elements, like so, right? Only between the elements. And if something is vertical, it's also going to be only between the elements in here and the elements in here, which will result, hopefully, in a more universal, you know, padding between those things. So it's not particularly padding, it's more like spacing. Yeah, spacing is actually a better name. So we need to introduce the spacing. And it only affects the things between the elements, right? Gaps, maybe gaps, right? So maybe gap. So it's only going to affect the thing between the elements, and because of that, it's going to result, probably in theory, This is how I see that. In universal, think like across all of the things, regardless of how nested they are, I think. So for example, if I start, you know, splitting here vertically, you're gonna end up with this. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I think it's gonna work. I think it's gonna be universal. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to do that. Let's go ahead and try to do that. How are we gonna be doing all that? That's a good question. So let me do padding gap, right? So this is basically the gap. This is the gap, and where do we call this function? This becomes a gap, and where do we call this function? We call this function in here. This is the gap, which means that we have to replace padding with gap 3 times, if I remember correctly. Yeah, actually 4. Okay. So let me try to recompile this entire thing, and it complains about padding, right? So this is because it has to be gap. What else? Okay, so this one is interesting. So because the way we apply the gap depends on the orientation, so we cannot do universal thing anymore, right? So the cool thing with this padding approach is that I can slap it after the orientation, and it's the same for both of the orientation, but now yeah, you have to do that like individually for each individual orientation, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. Right, so if it's a horizontal, so we can do, if you are the very first element, right, if you are I equals 0, right, so this is basic. I think we have effectively 3 cases in here, right? So let me see. So this is the first case. You basically just pad like this. We can even offset the width by half of the padding, right? So we can just take a half of a padding in here, right? So if this is that, we keep the x as it is, but we take the width and we subtract half of the gap, right? It's not padding, it's actually gap, right? Half of the gap. And that's it. In terms of y stays the same. It's only width, right? It is only width. I don't see any like other changes, right? So the other thing is when you are in the middle, right? So, and I suppose we can actually handle it last. So the other case here is when you're the last one. So when you're the last one, it's kind of similar to being the first one, except you offset from the left rather than the right. So let's do I greater or equal L count -1. Yeah, so this is basically the last one. Right, so we can put something like first, last, middle. Yeah, something like this. So in this case, we take our x and we add half of the gap, right? We just add half of the gap. We keep y the same, but width is going to be subtracted with the full gap. So it's subtracted with the full gap because we have half of the gaps on both of the sides, right? So we have both of the sides. Oh, it's a middle one, goddammit. Right. So it means, yeah, it's a middle one. I confused myself. Yeah, it's a last. It's a middle one. It's a middle one. All right. So, and the last one, it's kind of similar to the middle one, or x plus half of the gap. But in terms of width, we subtract half of the gap. Okay, I guess that's it. Yeah. That's basically the cases. We can take a look at how it worked out, if it worked out at all. I think it worked out. Look at that. Yeah, it worked out. But I mean, it's only for horizontal one, but it worked out nonetheless. Right, so the only thing we need to do is the vertical one. Right, and I think for the vertical one, we can basically use sort of like the symmetrical rule, right? We can just invert. Instead of W, use H, right? Instead of W, use H. Instead of X, use Y. And that's it. So, and we implemented that for the horizontal thing, and there you go. Right, so, and now we have a universal padding across all of them, actually. This is the universal padding across all of them. That's actually pretty cool. So, yo, what the fuck? But I think there is some sort of a problem in here. it kind of, so the width of the first and last one ends up being bigger than the middle ones. By definition, actually, believe it or not, by definition. If you take a look at the definition, right, for the last one we subtract half of the gap, and for the first one half of the gap, and for the last one half of the gap. But for the middle one we subtract the full gap. So by definition, the width of the first and last one are bigger than the middle ones. So that's kind of important to actually consider, in my opinion. Right, and yeah, so when the... Oh, you can literally see that. You can literally see how, yeah, if you actually shrink them, you know, enough, you can literally see how first and last one are bigger than the middle one. Yeah, that's precisely what I was talking about. Right, so it's kind of like not visible on such a scale, right? Because the scale that we're going to be working that with is just like this one, right? That's the actual scale. So maybe it doesn't matter, but maybe it does matter, who knows? I don't really know. So I wonder how easy it is to split even more. It's actually so cool, I really like that. So at any point I can say, okay, I want to split this green one even more. So I'm gonna just pop stuff like this, and I'm gonna add another green in here. And there we go, so I actually split it. Or maybe I'm gonna say, okay, no, I don't want it to be horizontal, I'm gonna make it vertical. And there we go, so this is the vertical one. So that's how easy it is. And then for the bottom one I can say, okay, I want to split it even further. Right, so this is going to be horizontal. And this is something like this, there we go. What's interesting is that, what if you don't provide, you declare how many of these things you have in here, right? So here we declare how many things we have, but what if we don't provide enough of these elements? So one of the things is going to be, yeah, so one of them is going to be empty, right? So, and it's never going to be, this is actually kind of cool. Yeah, this is actually kind of useful. You just don't provide one of the things, and yeah, so you can skip some of them even. And it doesn't even interact because we never call widget on that. Right, we never call widget on that. So, really, who needs CSS? Like, all of that was achieved without any CSS. Right, what you need is just a Turing-complete language and an ability to place elements in absolute values. Right, how cool would it be if CSS was just a simple, small Turing-complete language, and then all of these frameworks and layouts like flex boxes and some other shit were just frameworks on top of that very simple Turing-complete language. And people would decide, okay, I don't like the flex box approach because it's not modular enough, or whatever the fuck web people come up with. I don't know what that means. Yeah, I'm gonna use that cool new approach, block this, whatever the fuck they say. Right, so, and they can fight with each other. No, that approach is better. No, that approach is better. So, and yeah, but at the bottom it's gonna be like one simple Turing-complete language that just places things in absolute values. Right. And let's just let the web people do whatever the fuck they want, right? So that would have been so much easier, I think. And here's an interesting thing. The fact that HTML5 plus CSS3 is accidentally Turing complete probably, likely, hints you that that's exactly what you want. You want a freaking Turing complete language. Right. Even the whole universe just screams at you, brah, you want a Turing-complete language. Just, freaking universe like tells you, here is the sign, that's what you want. Also, oh, wait a second, I think some time ago, is that still a thing? There was a thing called JSS, is when people were doing styles with JavaScript. How is that not another sign that you just want a freaking Turing-complete language? Like, you have more than one sign that that's what you want, and people are being completely oblivious to that. It's just like, no, you want a Turing-complete language, that's what you want. God damn it. Anyway. I'm sorry. Cheers, by the way, I ran out of tea. Anyways, what if you provide more elements than you declared? I suppose it's gonna just crash with assertion. Yeah, it just crashes with assertion because you're trying to push more elements than you declared, and it kind of saved you from it's sort of like a safeguard. But that's the problem, actually. You don't really know where the fuck this shit happened, right? This is a huge reusability problem, chat. This is a huge usability problem, right? Imagine that you have this monstrosity, right? Imagine this piece of code looking at you, right? With its thousands of eyes saying, "Be not afraid." And it fails somewhere, and you don't really know where, right? So you probably basically forgot to remove one of the elements, but you don't know where. I think this code must tell you where exactly you did a fucky-wucky and potentially an oopsie-doopsie. How can we do that? So to do that, right, I think we need to know the place where you called layout stack slot. So one way you can do that, actually, you can pass the file path, right, where the file within which you call this entire thing, and a line, right, where you call this, like the line at which within that file you call this function, right? But you don't want to provide it on each individual line. It's tedious, right? Even though, right, so there is special macros that allow you to just automatically grab the file path and line, like so. You don't want to pass this stuff every time. Right, you don't want to pass this stuff every time. So what we can do in here, we can actually create a special macro. We can define a macro layout stack slot where you just accept ls, and here we can say this is sort of like implementation, or maybe lock, because it has a location. Right, and we're gonna forward that code, right, we're gonna forward that code there, and for the file path we're gonna provide the file, and for the line we're gonna provide the line. So in here, instead of assert, we're probably gonna just use the regular if, but it has to be inverted. If count is less or equal than 0, but I mean it's unsigned, so it's equal 0. Right, so what we want to do in here, we want to print something like layout overflow, right? So error layout overflow, right? And we want to provide like s and D in here, and we're gonna provide file path and line in here, and we're gonna do like exit 1. So there we go. So that thing should actually tell you where you potentially did an oopsie-doopsie and fucky-wucky, but something, oh yeah, it has to be std error, right? So it didn't compile properly. There we go. So as you can see, it tells you something like this. Wait, I did that in the wrong place, cat fucking damn it. Where did I do that? Layout slot. Yeah. Yeah, it's the wrong place. I'm supposed to do that in the layout slot. So in this function, I was checking whether you're not, yeah, if you're not underflow or something. Okay, so I'm gonna fix it soon. But the idea is the same. The idea is the same. I just picked the wrong function because I'm already tired. I'm streaming for 2 hours already, so that's the reason. Cut me some slack. Thank you so much, Microsoft. Nice nickname. I really like your nickname. For tier 1 subscription. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So scrap all of that shit. But the technique is the same. Trust me. The technique is the same. You just have to apply it to a different function, right? I mean, technically, we still need to do that. It's just like we have to forward the file path and line to here, like layout slot. Right, and the actual check has to happen within the layout slot instead of this assert, right? So, and basically it has to be I is greater or equal to the count, right? Greater than equal to the count, and then you just like exit like that. But that means also you have to accept file path, right? Because we have two layers of abstraction. So the first layer is the layout itself, and on top of the layout we build the stack of layouts. So if we're going to introduce a new thing, we have to penetrate two layers of abstractions, right? So that's quite important. That's quite important. The double penetration of the layers of abstraction is really, really important with our architecture. All right, and in here I need to bring back the thing, right? So when I do this thing, I need to be sure that the count is greater than 0, right? So it has to be an assert. Right, so greater than 0. What the hell, my sub was cancelled? I think maybe this is because I didn't accept the new contract or something like that. Oh, I can see. So the Twitch actually changing some stuff with the contracts and everything, and because of the current situation, they may literally cancel my entire contract and never sign a new one. So I may actually lose my partnership. Thank you very much. Cool. So gonna pay 25 if you don't accept new contract. Oh, I mean, the question is, are they gonna even allow me to accept it? So that's the thing, because they may say, oh, we don't work with your country anymore, sorry. So just like, and what's funny is they may actually still take 25 out of me. But anyways, whatever, I don't give a shit about this world anymore. So what do we have in here? So this is ls, this is l. If it's greater or equal to the count, we can't really do anything. And there we go. So here we have a layout overflow, but here is an interesting thing. It points exactly at the widget that overflew this stuff. Actually useful, actually helpful, right? Because it's a very serious issue, right? So because look at the layout that you have in here. Like, and this layout tells you there is some problem in here. Go figure it out. Like, how am I supposed to figure it out? I don't fucking know. Even though I created this shit, I still don't know where the error is. But now this thing actually tracks all of the locations where you call this layout slot. And if you overflew the layout, it tells you precisely. It tells you precisely where you did a fucky wacky and oopsie doopsie. How about that? How about that? We got this beautiful, beautiful framework. Isn't that cool? Fuck CSS, we have pure C. Dab, dab, dab. Anyway. I'm already streaming for 2 hours. Would you look at that? Already streaming for 2 hours. So, yeah. So that's basically everything that I wanted to do today. I wanted to like play with this idea of having like layouts for this system. And yeah, maybe we can try to apply this entire stuff, but I'm already streaming for 2 hours. So I think I'm gonna integrate this entire framework into the library already off screen, right? So let me do a committee for people who is interested. Maybe you want to play with this thing on your machine, right? So let's say layout introduce gaps between the widgets, right? So, and I'm gonna push that right into the repo. Did it push it? I think it pushed it. There we go. So that's pretty cool, and that's actually very useful. We can keep adding more and more interesting things in here, right? So the kind of like, it would be kind of cool to have some spacing, like in at left in here and at right. So maybe separate sort of margins would be very useful. Another interesting thing would be, what if I have one element that has to have exact aspect ratio? Right, so one of the elements has to be exactly square. Right, so how would we manage such elements in here? That's very interesting. Right, because we do have situations when the aspect ratio has to be preserved, and it's usually in case of textures, right? So these kind of textures, there is a little bit of a challenge with these textures, is that because they has to be square. and really kind of makes it difficult to make them arbitrary sizes and stuff like that, so we have to preserve that. It would be kind of cool if the layout allowed you to push things that have very precise aspect ratio and it just preserves it, and maybe even centers these elements if they don't exactly fit right, so, and maybe have an ability to align them or either to the left or to the right or at the center and stuff like that. Center the diff. Imagine centering a diff in 2023. Right, so you need an entire AI system to do that, right? Imagine developing a huge 1 trillion parameter language model just to be able to center a diff. That's insane. Anyway, so that's an interesting thing to play with, actually, right? So yeah, that's a lot of fun, and it's super simple, right? So you don't need anything complicated for this kind of stuff. Okay, I guess that's it for today. Thanks everyone who's watching me right now. I really appreciate it. Have a good one, and I see you all on the next recreational programming session with Azuzin, and we're gonna come up with something else. I hope today's stream was interesting, and I see you all next time. I love you all. Mwah!